This man walked into court wearing a medal on his chest. By the time he walked out, the judge's entire career was over. But it wasn't just about that medal. It was about something that had been buried for years, until now. The courtroom smelled like stale coffee and secrets no one wanted to talk about. You could feel it the moment you walked in, like this was a place where truth got filed away, not heard. Thomas Rudd, 57, steps in. Black suit clean pressed. Boots clearly worn from more than city sidewalks, and that silver star pinned right above his heart. It shined like it had something to say. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't on trial. He was here to testify. For someone the system tried to forget. A homeless veteran named Deshaun Mills, a man Rudd once mentored through a community outreach program. And as soon as Rudd walked in, every single pair of eyes followed that medal. The bailiff cleared his throat and leaned in quietly. "You might want to take that off before you reach the stand." Rudd didn't flinch. "I'll take my oath with it on," he said. "That star doesn't lie, and neither do I." The doors opened again. In walks Judge Raymond Coleman. 64, stern, lean, the kind of judge who believes order matters more than people. Known for running his courtroom like a drill hall. He adjusts his robe, steps up to the bench, frowns the second he sees the medal. "Mr. Rudd, approach the bench." Rudd steps forward. "What's that?" Coleman snats, motioning toward the medal. "Silver Star, sir. From Operation Desert Hammer. I was a combat medic." Coleman raises an eyebrow. "This is a courtroom, not a military parade. Remove it before you testify." The room freezes. Rudd's jaw tightens. "I'm not wearing it for show. I'm wearing it for the man who can't be here to testify. The one I couldn't save." Coleman's voice sharpens. That was not a request. But Rudd doesn't move, doesn't blink, and this won't be a regular hearing. He turns toward the gallery and calmly unbuttons his jacket. There, tucked inside, is a sealed folder, labeled clearly. Classified, declassified 2022. You asked me to leave the medal, but what I brought with it might just leave you out of this courtroom, Judge. Coleman's eyes narrow. "You're skating dangerously close to contempt, Mr. Rudd." Still, Rudd doesn't move. He lifts the folder, slowly, steadily, like he's used to lifting things that matter. This is a field transcript, declassified last year, written by Lieutenant James Elroy, signed off by Brigadier General Helen Cruz. His voice stays even, but the words, they hit like artillery. It details the military tribunal I was part of, the one that tried to bury what happened during Operation Desert Hammer. The room goes silent. Even the court reporter stops typing. Rudd continues, calm but raw, but razor sharp. It names 3 senior officials who ordered our unit to abandon a civilian compound under enemy fire. One of those names, he turns to face the judge, is Raymond Coleman, then a field legal officer, the same man who suppressed the report, who shifted the blame onto a junior medic. Pause. That medic was me. Gasps ripple through the room. People glance around, unsure if they're witnessing a trial or a reckoning. Coleman's expression, it shifts. He's no longer in control. He's calculating. "This has nothing to do with today's case," he says. "It has everything to do with it," Rudd replies. "Because if you had your way, I wouldn't be wearing this medal. I'd have a dishonorable discharge." He walks calmly to the witness stand and places the folder on the table. "You tried to erase history, but I lived it, and now every word of it is here. Verified, logged, sealed, and reopened under federal order." Coleman rises halfway from his seat. "If you think dragging my past into this case will..." Rudd cuts him off, doesn't raise his voice, just speaks truth. "Because the man I'm here for, Deshaun Mills, you wrote him up for misconduct too. Civilian disorder charge. Total lie. I've seen the file. I know your signature." The room turns heavy. No one moves. Then from the gallery, a VA attorney stands up. "Your Honor, if these documents are legitimate, we need to pause proceedings. I'm formally requesting immediate verification and possible recusal." Coleman's gavel trembles in his hand. "Court is in brief recess," he mutters, and walks out. Doesn't look back. For the first time all morning, Thomas Rudd exhales. 20 minutes into recess, the room hadn't emptied. Not even close. The courtroom stayed packed. Reporters whispered into phones, typing like their fingers were on fire. The VA legal team huddled up with lead counsel. Even the judge's bench sat heavier than before. Deshaun Mills, the man this case was supposed to be about, sat frozen, like he couldn't tell if he was still a witness or the reason the walls were shaking. Rudd, calm, medal still on his chest, arms folded, the folder untouched on the table, like it had already said enough. Then the doors opened again, and in walked Sloan Riggs, Federal Ethics Counsel. Sharp features, sharp voice, sharp mind, gray pantsuit, no wasted movement. She didn't come to observe. She came with purpose. She headed straight to the bench. "This hearing is now under joint review," she said, her voice carrying clear across the room, "by the Office of Military Integrity and the Department of Veterans Affairs Oversight Division." No one interrupted. "The documents introduced by Mr. Rudd have been authenticated via secure federal channels." You could hear pens dropping. She flipped through a few pages, then continued, like she'd been waiting months to say it. The tribunal report includes signed testimony, internal memos, maps, and communication logs, all tied directly to battlefield orders that were later covered up. She looked straight at the substitute judge, then toward Rudd, then finally the gallery. They confirmed the involvement of then-Lieutenant Raymond Coleman, who, according to these files, participated in suppressing a military investigation and reassigning blame to non-officers. You could practically hear people's thoughts cracking apart. Deshaun leaned forward, whispering, "That's real. That's really in there." Rudd nodded without turning. "I've been waiting 2 decades for someone to listen." The bailiff walked over with a white envelope, whispered something to the substitute judge, now seated in Coleman's place. She opened it, eyes widening as she read. "Judge Coleman has submitted a letter of temporary recusal," she said, trying to keep her tone neutral, "pending investigation." The gallery stirred again. This wasn't just unusual. This was historic. Riggs stepped forward. "He may want to make that recusal permanent." Then she turned to Rudd. "Mr. Rudd, the Oversight Committee would like to formally request your testimony in Washington regarding these findings." The room didn't cheer. It didn't need to. The silence was louder. Rudd leaned back slightly in his chair. "Only if I can wear the medal." Moments later, the gavel dropped twice. "Court is now back in session," said the substitute judge. "Mr. Deshaun Mills, please take the stand." He stood slowly. You could tell that left leg had been giving him trouble for years, stiff from an old service injury. His shirt collar was frayed. No medals, no folders, just lived experience and a VA-issued hearing aid that buzzed faintly as he walked past the gallery. He took the oath. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. His voice barely cracked the room, but it didn't need to. Everyone was listening now. Rudd gave him a small nod from the side. The VA counsel stepped forward. "Mr. Mills, can you explain how you first came into contact with Judge Coleman?" Deshaun inhaled slowly. You could see him gathering more than just his thoughts. He was gathering the strength to relive it. "I was living in a temp shelter on Belmont Street," he said. "Volunteered with the rec center. Ran chess nights for the kids." Then his voice hardened just a little. "One day, some city rep shows up, says the building lease is being pulled, claims structural issues, and then out of nowhere, I get hit with a civil disobedience citation." He turned his gaze to the gallery. "I wasn't even there that night. I was in the hospital. Broken ankle." That one sentence felt like it hit the oxygen out of the room. Whispers spread like wildfire. People looked at each other, like they needed confirmation that yes, they just heard what they thought they heard. The VA counsel leaned forward. "And that citation? Who signed it?" Deshaun answered without hesitation. "Magistrate order, signed by Judge Coleman." "Are you certain?" Deshaun reached into his back pocket, pulled out a folded, worn document like he'd carried it for years. "I kept it, thought it was just a mistake, but then I met Mr. Rudd. He showed me a different report. Different guy, same format, same handwriting, same lies." Rudd stood. "Your Honor," he said, "I'd like to enter Exhibit B, a list of 17 separate citations issued under Judge Coleman's name, all within the last 10 years, all filed against low-income veterans or civilians actively enrolled in VA programs." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting a pattern of discrimination?" Rudd didn't blink. "No, Your Honor. I'm saying it was a career of it." Deshaun added quietly, "They called it misconduct. But it felt like I was just inconvenient." That word landed heavy. Everyone in the room felt it. Inconvenient. And for the first time in Deshaun's case, someone actually wrote it down. Not him, the court did, but this time it wouldn't be him labeled as the problem. it would be the man who signed those papers. Court was adjourned briefly, but no one left. They knew something big was coming. Federal Ethics Counsel Sloan Riggs stepped back into the room, holding a small, unmarked drive. Just one. She didn't say a word at first, just handed it to the bailiff, who plugged it into the courtroom projector. The judge gave a subtle nod. Screen came down. Lights dimmed. The room went still. Then click. A forwarded email popped up on the screen. The header read, "From rcultman@city.gov to Development Board Consultant, date 3 years ago." It read, "These VA projects are political landmines. Shut them down early if they get loud. If you need citations, I'll authorize what I can. Keep the optics neutral." That last line? It didn't land like a suggestion. It landed like a command. You could hear the gasp ripple through the room. Reporters' jaws dropped. The gallery stirred. Then another email appeared. Different date, same sender. Nose is back on the radar, gave another speech at the shelter. Get him off the city lease. He's a liability. This time, the shock turned to anger. Murmurs grew louder. People shifted in their seats, stunned by the boldness of it. The judge's own staff exchanged nervous glances. Riggs stepped forward again. This time, she didn't just speak. She called it out. These emails show targeted actions. Deshaun Mills was flagged by name. His presence, his voice, labeled a threat. She looked around the room. Judge Coleman authorized citations, used his bench to protect real estate partners, not veterans. This wasn't sloppy oversight. She paused. This was collusion. Deshaun didn't react, just sat still, head bowed. Rudd didn't look away from the screen. He didn't need to. He'd been carrying this truth for years. But now it was finally being heard. The judge picked up her gavel slowly. "Effective immediately," she said. "This courtroom suspends all rulings made by Judge Raymond Coleman regarding veteran civil penalties over the last 10 years. These cases will now be reviewed under federal oversight." It felt like the whole room exhaled at once. A weight lifted, like someone finally cracked a window in a place that had been sealed shut for years. Reporters jumped from their benches, grabbing their phones. Deshaun looked toward Rudd. "I didn't think anyone would believe me," he said. "That's how people like Coleman keep power," Rudd replied. "They make the truth feel too heavy to carry alone." Then he looked up at the screen one more time. But this time, there was no fear in his eyes, because what he carried, it had just leveled a career. The courtroom buzzed with aftershock. Cameras rolled silently. Court sketch artists sketched faster than usual, trying to catch every expression. And then quietly, Thomas Rudd stood again, walked slowly back to the stand, but not as just a witness anymore. Now, he was the witness, the one who changed the direction of the entire case. The substitute judge looked at him. "Mr. Rudd, you may deliver your final statement before this court transitions jurisdiction." Rudd nodded once. Then slowly, he removed the medal from his chest. He didn't toss it, didn't wave it, didn't even speak right away. He placed it on the witness stand. Right in front of him. "This medal," he said, "was pinned on me by a soldier I couldn't save." Everyone leaned in. "I wore it today because I thought maybe, just maybe, it would be the only thing that made someone in power take me seriously." He looked toward the camera, toward every person watching from outside those walls. "But I realized something. You don't need a medal to be heard. You don't need discharge papers or battlefield wounds or a folded flag on your bookshelf." He turned his gaze back to Deshaun, who hadn't looked away. "What you need is to speak truth, loud enough that even the people who benefit from silence can't pretend anymore." He stepped back from the mic. Then one more sentence, quiet, but it cut through everything. "Judge Coleman taught me what corruption looks like." He nodded toward Deshaun. "But Mr. Mills reminded me what courage sounds like." Then Rudd picked up the medal, walked across the room, and placed it in Deshaun's hands. "You fought in a war I never had to," he said softly. "The one back here. And you did it with nothing but your name and your word." The entire courtroom stood, not out of protocol, not because they were told to, but because they knew they'd just witnessed something no verdict could explain. 3 hours after the courtroom emptied, the cameras weren't done yet. Neither was the story. Judge Raymond Coleman stood behind a podium, flanked by 2 attorneys. But it wasn't the kind of presence that carried authority anymore. His jaw was clenched, his hair slicked back. No robe, just a tailored suit that felt too clean for what had just happened. Behind him, the city seal gleamed under hot press lights. In front of him, dozens of microphones, pointed at him like bayonets. He opened his mouth. "I want to address the coordinated smear campaign that unfolded in my courtroom today." There was a flicker of disbelief in the crowd. A few reporters glanced at each other. He kept going. The so-called evidence introduced was never vetted according to judicial standards. I deny any wrongdoing. These documents were taken out of context. He tried to keep the voice steady, but you could hear it. That edge of desperation creeping in. My record reflects a commitment to city code. That's all. Then, someone from the middle row called out, "What about the email where you said, if you need citations, I'll authorize what I can?" Coleman didn't flinch, but his eyes flicked sideways for half a second. "Taken out of context," he replied. Another reporter, louder this time. "You called veterans liabilities. Do you stand by that?" He straightened. "This isn't about veterans. It's about administrative control, civic order. It's unfortunate some people use past military service as a shield against accountability." Gasps. Not loud, but they were there. And then, from the back of the room, a voice that didn't need a mic to cut through all of it. "What's your past service, Judge?" Silence. Everyone turned. It was a local radio journalist, a Marine widow, known for asking the questions no one else wanted to ask. Coleman blinked. "Excuse me?" She repeated slower this time. "Did you ever serve? Combat? Any branch?" A long pause. Too long. Finally, he spoke. "I worked for military legal services, stateside." That silence that followed? That said everything, because everyone in that room understood what he didn't say. He never saw war. Never stood in uniform in enemy territory. Never had to carry someone bleeding while bombs landed nearby. He never stood where Thomas Rudd stood, or where Deshaun Mills lived. The reporters didn't shout, didn't argue. They just started leaving, one by one. Until Coleman was standing in front of a row of empty chairs, still talking, still holding on to a version of power that had already left the building. 2 days later, on the front steps of the VA Support Center, Deshaun sat quietly, paper cup of black coffee in hand. He watched as workers installed a new plaque near the entrance. It read, in honor of the voices that wouldn't be silenced, Rudd and Mills hearing, 2025. He shook his head, almost in disbelief. "Still doesn't feel real," he muttered. The center's admin stepped outside, holding a thick envelope. "This came by courier," she said, hand-delivered, your name on it. Deshaun opened it slowly. Inside, 2 things. The first, a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs. The second, a document stamped with the seal of the Office of Congressional Affairs. He read the first page once, then again. It was a public apology. The second page, an offer. He stared at it, whispered to himself, no way. The VA had created a new role just weeks after Rudd's testimony. They offered it to him, community advocacy liaison. He'd advise the agency on how to better serve veterans, real policy reform, a voice on the inside. Finally, down the block, a black sedan pulled up. Thomas Rudd stepped out. The silver star was in his pocket now, not worn, just carried. "You read it?" he asked. Deshaun nodded, still stunned. "They want me to fly to D. Help write a bill. Told you the Lord listens, eventually." Deshaun looked down at the documents. "You knew this would happen." Rudd gave a quiet smile. "No, but I knew if someone like you finally spoke, they wouldn't forget the sound." He held up his own envelope. "They offered me something too." "What?" "Director of Veteran Whistleblower Protections, 3rd District." Deshaun chuckled under his breath. "You gonna take it?" Rudd looked off toward the city. "Only if I can still wear boots to the office." They both laughed, and for that moment, there was no courtroom, no citations, no judge, just 2 men, coffee in hand, watching a new name being etched into old walls. The chamber was full, but this time it wasn't a courtroom. It was the Judicial Review Council, and for the first time in decades, Judge Raymond Coleman wasn't sitting behind a bench. He was in front of it, flanked by 2 attorneys, stiff posture, hands folded, eyes empty. His judicial robe, the one that once symbolized control, hung quietly in a garment bag behind him. More like a reminder of what used to be than something he still owned. At the center of the panel sat Justice Nain Holloway. She addressed the room with a voice that didn't need volume to carry weight. This hearing concerns allegations of judicial misconduct, bias, falsification of records, and abuse of authority in civil and veteran-related cases. Behind her, a screen showed a single line in bold font. "If you need citations, I'll authorize what I can. Keep the optics neutral." That line didn't need explanation anymore. Everyone knew what it meant. Then, another voice spoke. Thomas Rudd, approved to speak. He walked forward, no medal, no folder, no performance, just presence. When he spoke, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I'm not here to punish Raymond Coleman," he said. "That's your job." A few heads turned. Rudd wasn't done. "I'm here to say thank you." The room shifted, eyebrows raised. "Because if he hadn't tried to silence a metal, I might never have spoken. If he hadn't buried Deshawn's voice, the country wouldn't be rewriting the laws to protect people like him." He looked at Coleman. "You were the storm, but you were also the spark." Then quietly, "And when the lights came on, we saw you for what you were." Justice Holloway leaned forward. "Mr. Rudd, do you believe Raymond Coleman is fit to ever return to the bench?" "No," Rudd said instantly, "but I do believe he should remember what it felt like to be on the other side of silence." He stepped away from the mic, slowly, intentionally. Coleman didn't look up. He didn't need a verdict to know what was coming. Overlooked details. The committee left for closed deliberation. When they returned, Justice Holloway took the center seat again. Her gavel rested softly on her folded hands. "We, the Judicial Review Council," she began. "Having reviewed all testimony, documents, and prior case records," she paused, "issue the following ruling." The room held its breath. Judge Raymond Coleman is hereby disbarred from holding any judicial office, state or federal, effective immediately. Shockwaves, quiet but seismic, rippled through the crowd. All rulings issued in cases involving veteran-related infractions over the past 12 years are vacated and subject to independent review. Gasps turned to applause. Not wild cheering, just the kind that happens when something broken finally begins to heal. Coleman didn't say a word. He stood, gave a nod to no one in particular, then walked out through a side door. No robe, no gavel, no defense left. But in the back of the chamber, Deshawn Mills and Thomas Rudd stood together, unmoving. Reporters swarmed as they exited the building, throwing questions rapid fire. But Rudd raised a hand, not to quiet them, but to say one last thing. "This wasn't just about one bad judge," he said. "It's about what happens when the people in power stop listening." Deshawn added, "And what happens when we speak up anyway." Butta. That night, headlines burned across screens nationwide. Judge removed after metal defiance uncovers systemic abuse. Silver Star sparks courtroom reckoning. One voice, one metal, one collapse. Justice we built. Butta. 3 months later, the Rudd-Mills Act passed through Congress. It created federal protections for veterans in civil court systems, banned selective enforcement based on service status, created penalties for using citations as tools of control. It wasn't a bandage, it was a foundation. And back at the VA Center, right where it all started, a new plaque was installed. No gold trim, no fancy quote, just a line that said exactly what needed to be said. Truth doesn't need a title. It just needs someone who refuses to take off the medal. This story isn't about medals. It's about what happens when silence gets too loud, and someone finally decides to speak. So if you've ever been ignored, overlooked, or told you don't belong at the table, let this be your proof. They might try to write you out, but they don't get the last word. Stick around. We tell stories the system doesn't want remembered, and the next one might just hit even harder.